tell me if I'm jumping ahead and you picked up on it and included in a slide, but I wanted to mention it here because I had never really thought about this. But at the end of this sermon, maybe at the end of these chapters, in one of the letters, I think to Philadelphia, he says that he that overcomes will sit with me on the throne, on a throne. I'll give him to sit with me on my Father's throne. To anyone that overcomes. I wonder what Ray would say. I thought it was interesting that he didn't stop there because they make such a big deal about the 12 thrones and that symbol that the apostles have this authority. But that authority there is given to all believers pretty clearly.
Steve, when he was doing his thing, was talking about the fact that it was the apostles who were going to be kings and priests. And Ray said much the same thing in regard to John when he was starting this discussion. Scripture tells us that it's believers who will be kings and priests. So it's very much the same thing. They have they looked for the eye candy, grabbed it, and they're doing it's mine, versus anybody else's. Yep.
Well, I remember our last session, I think it was Steve who was saying, we're all going to be given gifts, but we're going to be sitting on thrones. You're not.
Now, there's something important to note here, is to note that John, being one of the apostles, had governing powers and authorities to write letters to the pastors of the various congregations that were scattered throughout Asia. Now, there are some people who think that the highest level of authority is the pastor of a locality, thus making so-called Church of God congregations and their pastors as little popes that reign in their own little dominion, much like they did in Europe and the little dominions that reigned in the kingdoms throughout Europe. That's right. And as long as you're within a certain boundary or in a certain locality, you are underneath only of one pope. And here we see John writing letters to the 7 churches of Asia.
You want to talk about being self-aware?
He's letting everyone know that they're hierarchical and not congregational, that's for sure. I know we've had that discussion before, Lee.
And that the problem with the Protestants is that they've multiplied little tiny popes everywhere. And then along comes the COGR, and they have birthed 12 little popes, and they don't even see it. It is so neat.
Another of the same thing.
Yeah, it's actually kind of humorous.
I thought it was interesting to reflect on the fact that this is another instance. They're talking about the Nicolaitans. They're talking about all these subgroups already, right toward the close of the 1st century. That the apostles and in the epistles do the same. The people that say they came from me, people that say they're apostles and they're not. They have all of these factions already in Christianity that have branched from the central authority. And that's interesting. And I don't know if it gives any evidence about, if the original apostles preached the way that Ray and Steve preach, you would think that the central authority question would be very clear, that the, succession of leadership came from Jesus to James or whomever. And that was the main thing that we learn about when you get converted. It doesn't seem to be that was what the 7 churches got clear instruction on at all, because they certainly have to be, things have to be fixed when other people show up and get taken seriously. So it makes you wonder, how much was this emphasized?
I think the apostles, you have to acknowledge that the apostles had authority. I mean, you can't get around that. They certainly did. They were recognized and they were listened to. But you just don't see that model of them being autocrats. You see more of a cooperative ministry. You see Paul talking about co-laborers and that sort of thing. So it seems like, and the Jerusalem Council, who was in charge of the Jerusalem Council? James, yeah. Well, so
then,
go ahead.
what do you mean by that?
What I mean is that there was not a decree that came down from the apostles about we're going to do this or we're going to do that. People debated and discussed and came to conclusions, and then the group as a whole acted. So I don't see the model that Ray looks at as being a preeminent model. And he likes the Catholic Church a great deal. But the question is the Catholic Church even a good model? I don't know that it is.
They did decree something. James does step in and say, like, all right, this is it. These are the three things.
Based on discussion.
Based on discussion. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with the COGR, there is no discussion.
Yeah.
It is nothing's open for debate. Ray says, even if you're wrong, even if I'm wrong, I'm still right. And if you're right, I'm not even going to entertain you anyway. So
yeah, so it's a very different thing. So yes, the apostles have authority, but no, they were not ruling over the churches in that kind of sense. It was a group of people initially working together, and it may have been better had they never organized into the bodies that they did. I don't know. There's something very special about groups that are cohesive and functioning and working together versus if this is kind of a rant about churches, but basically when you move to a governmental system of churches, you have one pastor doing ministry and you have 100 people or 200 people watching him do ministry. It's incredibly inefficient. And it's not the way it was meant to be done, I don't think. But I digress.
It is interesting, that turn of phrase that we talked about earlier, where Paul says, whatever those apostles were, doesn't matter to me. Like, he almost seems to be saying that authority that those Jerusalem apostles have doesn't bear weight with me. I have my own revelation, and I wonder, I'd be curious to know what they would say about that. There's an instance there of someone, even though he is an apostle himself, putting aside the authority of other apostles.
Well, he rebuked Peter, did he not?
Peter.
The apostles are kings and priests.
Now, we have always taken verse number 6 as in a very general sense, and I won't just part with you, but I want you to give me your attention and let me talk to you for just a little bit. I think it is more properly put and more in context of these scriptures to know that John was making reference more to himself than he was to those he was writing to. He'll get to the message that he wants to give to them, but he's talking about himself more and saying, God has made me a king and me a priest.
What chapter is that? Verse 6 of 2? 1:6.
And while you got it, why don't you read it?
And hath made us kings and priests unto God his Father. To him be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so he's saying that the us there refers to apostles, not to the
right.
lay.
And he and Steve both do that. However, isn't it true that he could have also said himself, that is John speaking, God has made me, as opposed to us? I mean, it doesn't. If he'd meant that, he could have said that. But he didn't.
Yeah. There's no reason here to think that it's the apostles.
No, and so you get, they do such terrible exegesis. I mean, I keep repeating myself, but I'm so shocked sometimes when I look at this, because you wouldn't see that kind of error. I mean, nobody would do that unless if they had a theological axe to grind, I guess they might, but otherwise you'd never get there.
Continues to show where they want this to fit, where they want it to take you.
And I see them they do that a lot. They do everything they can to point to them being in a place of authority, and you are beneath me.
Exactly.
This
That's-
applies to the apostles. It does not apply to you.
Right.
Yet, 1 Peter chapter 2 says, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Christ. And then Revelation 5 says, you have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. It's an effort to make the apostles everything, is really what it is.
I don't get why the laity eat it up.
I don't either. And actually, once I began to think about Ray as just simply being a liar, I'm sorry, but that's what it is. I don't know why people would follow somebody who was lying to them with such consistency. And I'm sure they don't see it as lying. They see it maybe as either they think he knows it and therefore they accept it as being true, or they're just being very gracious because they don't want to hurt his feelings. I have no idea.
It's kind of like what we talked about with the Mormons, where they have a presupposition that's incorrect and everything makes sense then if you believe these guys are God's apostles. In fact, that Ray told John what to write in this book. He's the one that knows best.
He certainly does. If he's the author, he should know.
My experience in Elmer, the laity truly believe that Ray is the governor of the world.
Right.
And that salvation is through Ray.
Yeah.
One of them even said to me, yeah, we need to point people to Ray. It's like, no, we need to point people to Jesus. But for them, it's Ray Tinsman.
Disappointment is a bitter pill to swallow, paying back the hope I borrowed from someone I never knew. And it's a forfeit, humans in the suits of heroes, undressed by whispered conspiracies, in quest for the truth. But if the truth is what you're looking for, you don't get to choose the answers anymore. So tell me, do you really still believe that the truth will set you free? I do. Someday, well, if the truth is what I'm looking for, I don't get to choose the answers anymore. So tell me, do I really still believe that the truth will set me